this fall.
Here she comes.
There's a new name for adventure on television. Brisco County Jr.
You care to try me?
He's all action.
You're not an outlaw.
No.
He's all excitement. And he's about to bust loose into your living room. Welcome to the Wild West Fox style. And now, the series premiere of The Adventures of Brisco County Jr.
Hi, everybody. This is Carlton Cuse, the creator and executive producer of Brisco, and I'm here with...
Hello there, I'm Bruce Campbell, playing that guy Brisco, that darn Brisco.
For Brisco, I was partnered with a feature writer named Jeffrey Boehm, and we had an overall deal at Warner Brothers, and Jeffrey was the writer of Lethal Weapon 2, Lethal Weapon 3, and Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, and I worked with him on the development of those movies as well as on a number of other projects at Warner Brothers. While we were doing this, a executive named Bob Greenblatt at Fox, through Warner's Television, had us in for a meeting and said, look, I would love to do a television pilot with you guys. One of the things I'm really interested in is sort of like the old serials that used to run before, Saturday matinee movies. It seemed like a really interesting challenge. So I really sort of jumped at the opportunity, and I started really churning this around in my head, and actually went out and was able to track down copies of some of these old serials and started watching them. And what I thought was really fascinating about these old serials was that they really sort of fell into two genres. Those were Westerns and science fiction. So the idea occurred to me that, well, what if we combine these two genres together and actually do a Western with science fiction elements? I think good projects in Hollywood are blessed by circumstances that are sort of out of your control as a show creator. It's that magical thing that happens, and for whatever reason, when this pilot script existed, our world and Bruce Campbell's world crossed, and Bruce had come from the Evil Dead movies with Sam Raimi and had done things that were in a very different genre, in the horror genre, but that were sort of, quirky and humorous in ways that were somewhat similar to what we were trying to pull off in the Brisco pilot.
As an actor, I base my reaction on whether I get nervous or not when I read a script. I read Brisco and I started trembling pretty much because you get the anticipation of going, wow, this part is actually available. He was a Harvard-educated lawyer. He was smart, yet he knew all the cowboy skills. It was bigger than life. While reading, I'm going, oh yeah, sure, they're going to do that. There's orbs and this and trains going off into canyons. And it was big. It was really big. So I thought, well, it reads like a movie. This is like making a movie. I couldn't wait.
Welcome to the debut episode of
The Coming Thing.
The Adventures of Brisco County Jr. podcast. I'm Diallo Frank, and with me is...
Illegal Machine.
And we both watched the Fox television show from 1993. This is the 25th anniversary of the show. We're a little late in trying to get the show started, but honestly, I was actually planning on doing coverage of a whole other TV series for next year. And, I knew that eventually we would do Adventures of Brisco County Jr. coverage, but it didn't occur to me that this is the 25th anniversary until I started seeing a bunch of observations of X-Files celebrating its quarter century and going, oh yeah, Brisco County Jr. too. So a little bit of a rush job, unfortunately, but hopefully we can get a few of these out in 2018 for the anniversary. Technically, it's the 100th anniversary because it's the 100th anniversary of Brisco County Sr. being murdered by the John Bly gang. So this is sort of like the 100th anniversary celebration, the centennial anniversary of Brisco County.
Wait, 100th anniversary? He wasn't killed in 1918?
Oh, you're right. So it'd be the 125th anniversary.
Thank you.
Because math. So tell me a little bit about your relationship with the show, The Adventures of Brisco County Jr.
So let's see, 1993 is when this show came out?
Yeah.
Okay, I was preteen. So I just remember there was something about the show that just really stuck with me. There were a lot of shows I watched when I was kind of this age.
Well, I remember you didn't remember what network it was on. So did you even watch it in broadcast?
Yeah, no, I did. I did. I know I didn't catch every... it was the early 90s. It was, if you missed an episode, you missed the episode. There's no, you can go, oh, I want to stream it online afterwards. It didn't exist. I just remember seeing what I believe to be the vast majority of episodes, but that whenever I could catch one, I caught it.
Did you ever see the pilot movie before?
Yeah, I feel like I've recognized a lot of that.
And what's funny is I did not.
Really?
Yeah, because when we were first talking about doing this, you went online to see if there was any streaming options. I have the DVDs, and there is a streaming option out there that is obviously illicit because it's on a site that would not have it legally, obviously. And you're like, oh, this thing's 2 hours long. Was it that long? I'm like, nah, I don't remember them doing a feature film for the debut episode. When we were 45 minutes into it and they weren't anywhere near resolving the story, I realized, I was completely wrong about that. And of course, as you're watching the show, you see that tons of clips from the show end up being in the title sequence of every episode of the series. But I didn't remember the movie very well at all.
That's totally possible too. It could be the parts I'm remembering are just the parts that made it into the title sequence.
I don't think there was anything from the title
tied up with the train coming at them and stuff like that. Maybe that's where
Brisco backing up into Socrates and they're both going out the window.
Yeah.
Dixie Cousins seducing him and him dropping his gun belt onto the floors from there. When he rears back onto Comet there, I think is one sequence from pretty much everything from the title sequence of the series was in the original movie.
I feel like the orb did the orb float in water a lot throughout this series?
I don't know if this is the only time that happens.
I feel like the orb popping up in the water was another one that I'm just like that I
we may be getting ahead of ourselves though. We might want to explain what the Adventures of Brisco County Jr. is.
Okay, so the basic premise of the show is that famed sheriff?
He's a marshal.
He's a marshal,
federal marshal, Brisco County Sr.
Brisco County Sr. has finally brought in
the 13 members of the John Bly gang, which automatically throws me off because Pete isn't in custody, and Pete is like the number one lieutenant guy that you always see throughout the series. But instead, he's the guy who's engineering the jailbreak because they're all on a train. Brisco County Sr. is being interviewed by a reporter that he doesn't seem to have high regard for. The reporter has lost his tie pin, which John Bly has somehow gotten a hold of and is using to work it on his shackles. But it doesn't really matter because Pete's already come up with a cool way of stopping the train.
Yeah, so basically they put a gigantic rock on this train, and then he had a artist paint a perspectivized version of the train tracks going down with the sky and mountains and everything. There's a great little sequence where is that his name?
Yeah, Pete's
So Pete's critiquing the guy's art technique. It really needs a sunset. He's like, Pete, it's the middle of the day.
Well, I like too how he goes after the French Impressionists.
Yes, yeah.
This is the kind of show where I like where the show will go in a direction you're not expecting a Western to go into. This is a Western, by the way, in case you didn't catch on that.
And so then obviously it's there to fool the train conductor just long enough so that he can't hit the brakes and crash into the stone.
And see, what's funny too is that's a Wile E. Coyote thing, like from a Warner Brothers cartoon. And in '93, that seemed pretty far-fetched. But after seeing all the internet videos of all these people doing cool stuff with perspectives, or that hotel where they've got the weird geometric shapes that make you think that the floor is lumpy and it isn't, you realize, no, perspective, especially if you're depending on where you're seeing it from, can absolutely fool you in real life.
Yeah, no, totally. And that was the first thing I thought of was, those street artists that do like chalk drawings on the ground. It looks like a pit. You know what I mean? You would stop before you stepped on it because it looks like you're about to fall into a pit. And really, it's just, absolutely would totally work, especially when you're coming up on it at speed and you're coming around a bend on a train. I mean, you would glance up at it and just see, it's just more train track. When you think twice.
They did a nice job though of leaving little bits of the edges of the rock so you could tell, but you could also understand how you wouldn't be able to see that if you're in a moving train.
Right. So anyway, the train crashes into the rock. The remains of the Bly gang jump down, ambush the train, and while they're ambushing the train, Brisco County Sr. takes his pistol out and goes to the prisoner car. And as soon as he opens the door, the entire gang's escaped with weapons because they dropped weapons in through the roof.
Which is not what he's going to be expecting. The break is actually very smart. Pete comes off positively Machiavellian.
Yeah.
No, I mean, he comes off very smart in that first episode, and it's later on in the show that he comes, kind of cheeseball.
So anyway, they drop weapons down, so he opens up the door.
Expecting chained prisoners and not armed
and instead
released prisoners.
It's literally 13 dudes holding shotguns and pistols, and then they all basically fire at once and just light the dude up.
And the last thing you see is his Peacemaker pistol falling to the ground. Earlier on, he made a point of mentioning that it was a perfectly average, normal Peacemaker. It just had a really nice ivory-carved handle on it, so it was pretty, but it didn't make it shoot any better. That'll come into play later on.
So anyway, from there we pick up with...
But even before that, though, and again, this is something that throws you off when you've watched the series, is the movie starts and there's no opening fanfare or anything. It's just scenes of a map, really fuzzy text I think that this must have been shot for video because it still has a very bad video quality, and they may not get any better than that. But it's just showing like a map and showing the names of the various actors, and then they show coolies. Because of the context, we'll say Chinamen, but these are Chinese, essentially slaves, working on a railroad, trying to dig through a mountain, and they find what's referred to as an orb, even though I don't know if that's really technically correct, because while the central mass may be an orb, it has all these cylinders, these smooth gold cylinders projecting out of it. So it looks more like an asteroid or something.
It's very Sputnik-y.
They pull some of these rods from out of this orb. The inside of the rods is a glass cylinder that glows blue. Energy shoots and hits the coolies, gives them superhuman strength. They break free of their chains and walk away. And so then we see the death of Brisco County. And so one of the things that's blowing me away is that we're like, 5-10 minutes into this thing already, and the stars of the show have not appeared yet. There's still like this preamble. Right off the bat, it feels different than the rest of the series. It feels like it's sort of its own thing that's separate from the rest of the show.
The length of the show is feature filmy, an hour and 45, hour 50 or so.
TV movie feature filmy though, so it feels really stretched out a little bit.
But you can tell that's how they treated it too. You had the prelude, orb discovery, and then you go to the father's death, and that sets up all these big robber barons are all getting together to figure out who's going to go after the Bly gang.
Right. It doesn't make sense for this big bad bandit to be running around robbing them all. They're trying to rob the American public, and that kind of gets in the way of their earnings.
So the big story is they select Brisco County Jr. and not...
Well, technically, Socrates Poole, their lawyer, and the newspapers refer to him as their lackey, is the one who picks him as the best choice, although the closest runner-up is Lord Bowler.
Who was a bounty hunter.
Well, technically, they both are, right?
I don't know. Is Brisco... It sounded like Brisco's never done this before.
He's already a cowboy. He's already having adventures. So I don't think
cowboy having adventures. I don't think he's a bounty hunter.
I think he is a bounty hunter, though.
Is he?
I just think he's maybe working off in Mexico someplace, because they do set him up. The show opens up with him in Mexico, right, having run afoul of what appears to be some banditos, and he's got a
bad poker game,
and he's got that awful mustache. Which I saw some stills from the show when I was researching a few weeks back ahead of us actually recording something, and I was like, I don't remember Brisco County ever having that weird mustache. No, it's there, all right, but it's only in one scene of the pilot movie.
Do you want to talk about that scene?
No.
Okay. Anyway, so then the robber barons are introduced to Brisco County Jr.
They're expecting somebody who's very erudite and clean cut.
Because he was a lawyer, Harvard educated lawyer. And then he shows up and he's this crass cowboy, who was like, oh yeah.
Dirty, smelly, hasn't had a bath in 3 weeks.
Comes in dusting himself off, and they're like, gasping.
Oh, and he's smack talking too. He actually calls them robber barons to their faces,
which prompts, what was the main dude's the railroad guy?
The head of the Lord, I'm gonna have to check the IMDb on that. I'm not gonna be able to pull that up. I think it's Ethan Emerson. I don't know. We're just gonna call him the lead robber baron for now, because I can't name the character.
Anyway, he's the head of the railroad.
Clearly, he's not going to be in the rest of the series if we're not going to be naming him. But he's one of the group of bosses that are looking to pay for Brisco County Jr.
Right, and as soon as he's called robber baron, he's just like, you know what? Good day. We'll go get Lord Bowler. He'll be our guy. Good day with you, sir. And then he goes on a rant.
What was great about this scene was we wanted to bring in all of these old actors. All these guys in this scene are guys that were famous from...
They basically had their own television show, almost each one. This is the Virginian. James Drury had his own show.
Right.
Stuart Whitman, who I used to watch him doing westerns in the 60s and 70s.
Exactly.
A real tough guy. And then some of the other guys in here were Rayford Barnes, Paul Brinegard. Robert Fuller was on Emergency.
Yeah, exactly. But he'd also done westerns, too.
Yes, he had, exactly. And I thought that was a great idea because each of these guys has their own persona. They're great character actors, and they were great old tough guys.
He had been talking about he was looking for the coming thing. He's always been interested. That's the thing that got him away from being in the law. They said he'd wasted 7 years of his life going to law school and then not becoming a lawyer. And he's like, better than wasting my entire life. I'm looking for something more than just the law, something great that's going to come from the future to make our world a better place. And they're like, this guy's a dreamer. He's an idiot.
Well, no, what I love is...
But then he explains that, but regardless of all that stuff, nobody's going to fight harder than me. Nobody's going to shoot straighter than me. It's not just because I'm the son of Brisco County. This isn't my birthright. It's because I'm the best man for this job. And that's what convinces them.
But the reason they were about to fire him is because when he's explaining to him what the next big thing is, they're like, well, what is it? And he was all like, you bunch of robber barons or whatever. He's like, if if it was already here, it wouldn't be the next big thing. And that's when they're like extremely offended, like, "Oh, we get it, dude, nice one." And that's when they're like, "Peace out." But then he goes on his nice rant about, "I'm the best, I'm the quickest draw, I'm the best, I'm the toughest, I'm the smartest."
They were easily swayed, you know. He didn't have to give them any demonstration or anything. They're like, "Oh, okay. Well, you failed us immediately, but we're going to let you fail upwards and give you the job. Let's go ahead and sign the papers, and we like your moxie."
It had a lot to do with moxie, lots of moxie.
The Hudsucker Proxy was in the can, Army of Darkness was about to hit the theaters, and I had just landed a new talent agent. Things were looking up.
My first audition as their client was for the lead in a new Western TV show. With a television series, you don't just get the lead part, you've got to earn it. And landing the title role in The Adventures of Brisco County Jr. was a journey of its own.
With a TV series, particularly with me, it was my first series. You got to crawl through glass to get it. And for me, it was about 5 times I went back.
Audition number 1 was for the casting director. Their job, among other things, is to separate the chaff from the wheat and send only the best actors to the next level.
I remember walking into the casting director's office, and, it was a Western, so you tend to think, well, maybe there's a little drawl with this guy. And the second a Southern accent came out of my mouth, he went, "Drop the accent right now." So immediately, I think I made a bad impression, and then we had to start again.
Actors all look for a way to leave an impression on casting directors to avoid being lost in the shuffle. One audition piece for the show involved some fighting. Well, there wasn't much I could do in this small office, so I fell back on an old Bonzoid Sisters routine and flipped myself head over heels. "Oh my God!" the casting director screamed as he lurched back in his chair. This left a favorable impression, and I was able to audition for the producers. Now, they carry a large amount of weight when it comes to who gets cast for what, but in this high-stakes chess game, producers are not the final word, not by a long shot. With a reading and another flip, I cleared that hurdle. Audition number 3 was with the producers again. More of a work session than anything, it was to get me ready for the Warner Brothers TV execs. Audition number 4 was in a room full of attentive, quiet people. Among them were the 1 or 2 individuals who could send me up to the next level. Just before the audition, the casting director cornered me. "Bruce, you're going to do that flip thing again, aren't you?" "Yeah, sure," I said, as long as the back holds out.
But it was highly effective. It left an indelible impression every time you did it.
I'm killing myself. I'm like, give me the part already. I'll stop flipping.
Audition number 5 was the big one, for an even larger group of quiet people. The freaky thing about network auditions is that you have to pre-negotiate your deal. You have to hammer out every detail down to plane tickets and per diem with agents, lawyers, and business affairs people, and you still might not even get the part. Networks had obviously been in the awkward position of approving someone and then failing to close a deal. After the audition, which I could do in my sleep by that point, I decided to give the network brass a little speech. Actors aren't encouraged to interact with them, but I thought, the hell with it. They should know who they're getting into business with. Look, I just wanted you folks to know that if you cast me in this part, I won't stab you in the back. I'm a hard worker, and I'll do everything I can to help this show become a success. Okay, well, I guess that's it. Thanks for your time.
Not only did Bruce bring sort of a special humor and acting chops to the role, but also this incredible physicality that became very much a part of what defined who Brisco was.
Driving home that night, I got the call. I'll spare you the descriptions of how I hooped and hollered. It's far too embarrassing.
Look, it's every actor's dream to play a cowboy. So when this opportunity came up, where do I sign?
It was just one of those kind of collisions of an actor and a script that was just perfect. He was the right guy. I can't imagine Brisco having ever existed without him.
It was very, very exciting because I had never worked on a studio lot before. So here I was working for a studio. I had a studio contract, working at the same place where Errol Flynn and Humphrey Bogart and Betty Davis worked. That was really, really exciting.
So from there we go.
We don't have to go like scene by scene, but we do want to establish that Socrates Poole is going to be his direct supervisor, but he's liaison is the way they put it. Like there's the money men, there's him who's going to be basically holding the purse strings and looking for reports and things like that, and then there's Brisco actually on the road track down the Bly gang. And then, of course, they get an invite to dinner. They go to a dinner, and they're confronted by Lord Bowler, who basically explains that as long as Brisco County Sr. was working, he could barely make enough money to make this whole gig worthwhile for himself. And now, just when it looks like he's going to be able to finally make a living as a bounty hunter, Junior shows up and is going to ruin everything. So he says, the last person who leaves this table gets the job. And then he puts a stick of dynamite on the table, lights it.
Hijinks ensue, where he was like, which was a great scene because Brisco County's like, oh, you know what? I think I'm going to be here a while because I'm real hungry. And then he opens up the menu and he's just slowly reading. And then he asks for the waiter to come over, and the waiter sees it and he's like, oh my God. And he was all like, what do you suggest? He's like, the minute steak? And he was like, no. And then, of course, they're all like sweating, going crazy. And you see the waiter's kind of doing this, like trying to blow it out from a distance as he's like sweating right in the thing. And it was great, hilarious scene. And then he's like, I'll have the steak rare. And then he's just,
right away, sir. Zoom.
Yeah, he's like thick, rare. And he's like, right away. And he runs off until finally,
Lord Bowler knocks over the dynamite, cuts it with his big old Bowie knife that he'll use throughout the series. And then they get into a fight.
And once they get into a fight, they get arrested.
Yeah, and then Lord Bowler doesn't want anything to do with Brisco County because he's just like, look, we're going to get 60 days. This judge is harsh but fair. Just shut up and let him do his thing. And Briscoe's like, starts talking. Bowler makes it clear, I got nothing to do with this guy. And then Briscoe lawyers his way out of the situation. And Lord Bowler's like, wait, I'm with him. But he ends up going to get packed off to jail.
And that starts to show you a little bit that, Briscoe may be the goofy, kooky cowboy, but he did go to law school and he's not an idiot. Yeah. You know what I mean?
Well, and once he stops trying to swagger in front of the robber barons, and also I think that it's just a clear expression of his contempt for them. He wants this job, but I don't think he can stand who he's doing the job for. Once it's just him and Socrates Poole, he shows more of his intellect. He softens a bit, even though he does still treat Poole as a bit of a lackey. And then, of course, you have the frenemy relationship with Lord Bowler where they're both fighting over the same job.
The Fox guys wanted to debut the show in August, and so it came on August 17th in 92, I believe. Or 93? 93, I'm sorry. Yeah. 93. And we ran for 27 episodes in one season, and that's just an extremely huge order when you think most television shows.
For a 1 hour show, not a half hour show.
Right.
So you've got the shooting time. Yeah, and it was, for the most part, single camera as well. It wasn't the, 9 different cameras and things like that. It was a pretty straightforward way of shooting the show.
Right.
Funny that, talking about all the Western stuff, we had to do the gun tricks, and it was a trick to find a guy, and I think the guy's name, and I hope I pronounce it right for his sake, is Arvo Ojala. He was he was a guy, one of these old timers who came out, and he came to the set and said, all right, if you want to pull it out, cool. You want to cock it while you pull it out. Here's how you spin the chamber on your arm. You flip it from one hand to the next. You do quick stashes in there. And so it's a great thing that you could do between takes. You just practice your gun stuff.
About the rest.
Send it off to the dead sheriff. We were pulling guys
he
almost
was
from the
totally
grave.
Out of retirement. Came out of retirement, I think, practically to do that. And he was fantastic. And the thing was, and Bruce completely committed to learn how to do all this stuff. And we wanted in the Jeffrey and I wanted in the pilot to put in all this sort of iconic Western stuff. So all that stuff you saw of rolling the barrel down and using the gun, we really wanted to establish that Brisco had this special gun and it was his father's gun, and the horse and every all the we sort of decided to sort of take all these sort of iconic vestiges of Westerns and sort of reinvent them with the new kind of comic
but allow the guy to defend a character in court. He wasn't just a yes ma'am, no ma'am character. Right. Which I thought was a huge improvement on the archetype of that character. This was a fun sequence, too, because it shows you Brisco cashing in on his legal experience of being able to get himself out of jail, basically.
Exactly. We were trying to show that there were, sort of many arrows in the quiver of Brisco's arsenal, and they weren't just the traditional iconic cowboy things. He could do all of those, but he could also basically defend himself with his words.
Right, and the thing is, you talk about having to learn to do stuff. We... ran into Gordon Spencer, the great old wrangler, who basically I had to learn how to ride a horse and all the tricks for what you do with a horse on set.
Brisco starts trying to investigate what happens. John Bly, the master criminal, gets word of that, and then he starts setting up a circumstance where he was going to try to get rid of Brisco. But do you want to talk a little bit about John Bly?
I don't know. We don't really get introduced to him very much in this.
Yeah. And by the way, we might want to mention, too, Brisco County is played by Bruce Campbell. What was your relationship to Bruce Campbell, the actor, when you first started watching Brisco County Jr.? Was this your introduction to him?
It actually might have been, because I don't really know if I'd seen any. Oh, you know what? When did Army of Darkness come out?
Before this.
Okay, so Army of Darkness was my first Brisco County, Bruce Campbell introduction. So
did you recognize him from one?
Yeah, yes.
And see, me, I had been very curious about Evil Dead 2 since it had been advertised back in 86, and there's a big hubbub about it because it was X-rated essentially, and they released it unrated. And so I was always super interested in it, but I didn't get to watch that movie until I think around 90 or so. And so I basically went from Evil Dead 2, Evil Dead, Army of Darkness, all in the span of like a year or two. And so I was very familiar with Bruce Campbell. So I was really excited for this show when it was announced. So it was actually kind of weird for me because Brisco County was such a different character than Ash Williams.
He's different in a way.
He's
still very Bruce Campbell, so it's kind of hard to separate any of his characters.
I would say that the scene where he's confronting the robber barons is very on brand Bruce Campbell, Ash Williams, and I think as the episode progresses, you get more into Brisco County, because I don't think he ever played a character like Brisco County Jr. for pretty much the rest of his career, because he actually is a straight hero. He's not an anti-hero.
Noble,
he's not. Yeah, exactly. But initially, he comes off as being more of roguish, which falls away pretty quickly as the series progresses. And then what about Lord Bowler? We should probably mention, too, this is a large African-American man. He's listed as a half-breed, so I think he's supposed to be part Native American. And, besides running around in a duster and having long curly hair, not unlike Bishop, because, of course, everybody was fan-casting Julius Carry as Bishop throughout the early 90s, Bishop being the X-Men character.
Thank you, Wizard Magazine.
Yeah, but he also, of course, runs around with a dark blue bowler on, so it's pretty distinctive.
Well, it looks like he was wearing, like, Union soldier clothes, too.
Oh, is that what that? Yeah, you're right.
Does.
I think he is wearing a Union uniform, or a variation on it. Anyway.
Yeah, I don't know if they ever...
There's some, like, Native American touches in the mix as well, though.
Yeah. He's a crass, hard-talking bounty hunter.
And then John Bly, played by Billy Drago. Were you familiar with him before the show?
Airwolf. Wasn't he an Airwolf?
No, I think you're thinking of Jan Michael Vincent. Although the physical similarity is definitely there. They look a lot alike.
Right? So what else?
He was in one of the Delta Force sequels, the Chuck Norris movies.
Yeah,
he played a drug dealer. I think he was doing brownface for that. I think he's playing a Latino.
IMDb for him, dude. I know.
Well, Billy Drago was one of these guys who was in all these horrible action movies of the 80s. That was like his
always
whole thing.
The villain in all these movies.
Let's see. I'm going to go from the 80s forward.
Yeah, probably a good idea.
He did a lot of Westerns.
Really?
He was on Hardcastle and McCormick. Oh, he was in Pale Rider with Clint Eastwood.
Never saw Pale Rider.
Invasion USA. Maybe that's what I was thinking of with Chuck Norris. He did a Trapper John M.D., a Moonlighting. He did Hunter, Hill Street Blues.
I think I remember from Hunter.
He did a Fall Guy, a T.J. Hooker. So obviously he's one of these dudes who did all those. Because people don't remember. Well, maybe not today because they don't do that as much today. But back from the 80s backwards, mostly, you had these actors to where they would just go from show to show to show. One week you'd see that character. The actor would be playing pretty much the exact same character, but they just go from show to show playing that character type, over and over again. And then Billy Drago was one of those guys. He was always that slimy, vicious, cutthroat type guy.
I definitely saw him in Hunter and Fall Guy. There is no doubt. That is my 80s wheelhouse. Hunter, Fall Guy, Dukes of Hazzard.
And I know too, one of the big one, two big ones for me. He was in Vamp, the Grace Jones vampire movie. He was the albino lead gang banger. And then he was in Untouchables. He was the assassin in the Kevin Costner, Sean Connery movie,
which I
The
hated.
Untouchables. You hated The Untouchables?
I hated it. I thought it was so boring.
I'm sorry. I love that movie.
It's critically acclaimed. I watched it and I was like, this movie is freaking terrible. I remember like the scene where what's his name? Sean Connery gets shot and killed is like the stupidest thing I've ever seen.
Well, since we're spoiling that aspect, Drago's the one who kills him.
Was he the one that killed him?
Yeah,
my God. It's just, it goes on and on and on. It's just it's ridiculous. The movie's ridiculous.
That movie is special to me because I've mentioned this occasionally on some of our other podcasts, but for a time in that period, my father worked in confections or concessions. He was basically the guy who would travel from movie theater to movie theater, stocking candy bars, popcorn, drinks, all that kind of stuff. And so one day, I've talked to him, and he thinks we did this a bunch of times. We did this one time ever in my life. He picked me up on a Friday when I was off from school, and we went from movie theater to movie theater. And I watched several movies over the course of that. I watched The Monster Squad. I watched The Untouchables. And I want to say I caught some of the Living Daylights, even though I've checked the timeline and it doesn't really make sense. The movie would have to have been in theaters for a long time for me to have seen that one. But I definitely caught the other two because I saw the vast majority of both those movies. I think I managed to actually finish The Monster Squad, but it was like a year or two before I ever got to finish The Untouchables. And the last scene I saw in the theater was the execution of Sean Connery's character. So I did not get to see Billy Drago brought to justice for like a year or two after that. It wasn't until we actually got a VCR and then we could rent the movie.
Monster Squad's the winner of those two. What else do you keep going?
I'm not going to debate that because I do prefer Monster Squad. Even though I acknowledge Untouchables is the better movie, I've seen Monster Squad so many more times than I've seen the Untouchables. But yeah, so Billy Drago.
That's it? What, nothing else that he's in? That is,
if you're talking about later stuff, the one I was referencing was Delta Force 2, the Colombian Connection, where he played Ramon Cota. So yeah, definitely brown face. He was in Cyborg 2. He did a Walker, Texas Ranger.
Wouldn't have seen that.
A Nash Bridges, also a Carlton Cuse show.
Bridges, okay.
He did an X-Files. He was in a Michael Jackson video.
I'm sure I saw his Nash Bridges episode. I'm sure I saw him in X-Files.
He did a run in Charmed.
Would not have seen Charmed. That was not my show.
A Masters of Evil. He did the remake of Hills Have Eyes, but it wasn't a great role. He did a Supernatural. He was in one of the Children of the Corn sequels, but this was 2011. I doubt you saw that.
No.
That's post anybody giving a care about Children of the Corn. So anyway, the guy's prolific. It's one of those dudes you see him on tons of TV shows. You know who he is. As soon as he shows up, you know what kind of character he's playing. It was a great shorthand. He was the evil, slimy guy in tons of shows. So, but we don't get to see a lot of him, except that we realize that he's a master criminal that's going to be orchestrating the various heists of all these different sub-bosses underneath him. The one we're concerned about is, what's his name? Big Smith? What's the dude's name?
Yeah, that's right. I think it's Big Smith. And you're right. That's a good way to put it. All these other boss battles, because they make it pretty clear that he's having to take out all these tentacles before he gets to John Bly. I recognize him from a bunch of stuff too.
Yeah, the main one I think you remember is Con Air.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, he was in Con Air. That's another terrible film.
MC Gainey as
Big Smith.
Big Smith, yeah.
A great character actor who you're using again.
Yes, he's now on Lost, playing one of the mysterious others.
Oh, one thing I didn't catch, totally missed this. Brisco County Sr. is Arlie Ermey from Full Metal Jacket. Because the dude's got like a mustache. Did he even have a full beard? He definitely had a mustache and long hair. So I totally didn't recognize him, but it's Arlie Ermey. Cool.
Crazy. Was it the drill sergeant or what? I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah. We can't. I was
about to shoot some quotes off.
Yeah, we're trying to do this show clean, so we can't do any quotes from Full Metal Jacket.
I nearly fired off, and I was like,
nope. So yeah, so basically the big points of the show are that at one point, Brisco runs into a professor, Albert Wickwire, who is like a scientist who is very fond of Dixie Cousins, who is a stage performer, a burlesque stage performer. We meet Professor Wickwire's daughter, Amanda Wickwire, and we meet the people that are involved with Big Smith's gang, most importantly, Pete, who is a gunslinger who will be around throughout the series. Kind of a weirdo, kind of a goof.
Very eccentric.
Very eccentric. You know, don't touch Pete's pistol. If you touch Pete's pistol, he'll kill ya. But yeah, so Brisco's trying to work. Oh, I completely forgot to. At one point, Big Smith decides what we're going to do, what John Bly decides they're going to do is they're going to trick the Scarred Foot Clan into going after Brisco County Jr. And the Scarred Foot are basically Tong, their Chinese mob back in 1893. And they get into a big fight in a hotel room. You see that the reason why they're called the Scarred Foot Clan is because they have scars across their feet.
Now, this was one of my favorite scenes here. And, we, again, in the sort of effort to kind of mix up the genres of this was sort of our homage to doing like a little bit of like, Asian martial arts stuff in here. Sort of, Brisco versus the Asian, kung fu
the Asian
masters.
Mafia,
yeah. I love this line. It's just the greatest. Anyway, these guys came in and, we had this fantastic...
Which is good. It's a good ninja element. It's another dangerous element. It's not the traditional bar fight, fist fight. Now you're fighting with guys who have weapons for hands, And
we pretty much put in like everything but the kitchen sink in this pilot, and that's what you have to do in a pilot. You have to try to sell. There's a big clue there. The Scarred
Foot Clan.
Exactly.
Yeah,
The Scarred Foot Clan. And when you make a pilot, you really try to put everything but the kitchen sink in it so that you can kind of convince the network that there's enough stuff to sustain 100 episodes. So there was a certain calculatedness to some of this, which was, okay, we're just going to show you that there are many avenues that Brisco can take. And, if it has to, it'll become a martial arts show if that's what it needs to be to get a third season.
Brisco is led on a hunch he manages to get one of the Tong's medallions, and he tries to track it down in Chinatown. He talks to a gentleman who speaks in a obvious modern day California accent in no way. I think it's maybe for the best, because they could have done like a horrible stereotypical Chinese accent, but instead he just totally sounds like a dude from Cali in '93, right?
Really?
You don't think that guy had a Cali accent? He did not sound period authentic for sure.
It sounded almost like he was trying to do. No, I sensed some bad Chinese accent in there.
I didn't.
Are you serious?
He just sounded like a dude. I think the dialogue might have been stereotypical, but his delivery, he just sounded like a dude. But this leads Brisco to finding an underground lair where these dudes basically they prove their mettle by fighting on hot coals.
Hence the scarred foot.
Right. And they're looking to try to fight to the death with Brisco County Jr. when the head of the gang, James Hong, noted character actor. I'd be curious to know how Asian people see James Hong, because this guy was like the official Asian dude in everything for like 30 years straight.
Like Asian Cheech Marin, basically.
More so. Cheech Marin does not represent Latinos the same way that James Hong did Chinese people, because there were at least other Latinos. For years, I can't think of anybody else who was an actual Asian person that got the parts like this dude did. Usually it would be like Peter Sellers pretending to be Asian, as opposed to having an actual Asian dude in these things. But for people of our generation, he'd be most famous for Big Trouble in Little China.
Of course.
He's Lo Pan. And so it turns out that he is the one who carved the ivory handle on Brisco County Sr.'s Peacemaker as a sign of gratitude for the help that he had given. And so he immediately recognized that. They determined...
Wait. That was a good scene, though, where he got his pistol. Where, they showed his hat and all of his personal belongings and his pistol. He's like, I'll take the pistol. He's like, send the rest of it to the dead sheriff's museum. And he was like, that's kind of cold, don't you think? And
Socrates says this.
Socrates says
cold.
that. And he sort of explains, look, my father knew the line of work he was getting into, and Socrates, sort of deduces, oh, well, you've been basically preparing for him to be dead your whole life. And he's like, that's right, basically. And it was a very cold, yep, I'll take his pistol, send the rest of it away. I don't need any of it. Where you thought he was a tickle. They do a very good job of making you understand that even though he's taken this job, it's not some revenge.
Right. He's not that guy.
Yeah. He's not doing you killed my father, prepare to die. Like, there's none of that, which I think is very interesting.
Well, and there's several scenes where they test that sentiment too, and it bears out over and over again. He's not angry. He's not seeking revenge. He's trying to finish his father's work. He's trying to capture the men who were evil guys who needed to get captured anyway. It just so happens they're the guys who killed his dad, but he's wanting to capture them because the money's there and because it needs to get done. These are bad men. So he's a guy who's just really straight. He's just not an angry guy. It was something that was so different, especially once you got further into the 90s where there were so many rugged anti-heroes and stuff. And for me, especially watching it today, it's very, very refreshing to see guys like, look, these are just bad guys and I need to catch them. That's the job.
Well, and I like they do. They go, and like you said, they test it throughout the episode. They want you to understand this is not a revenge saga. You know what I mean? And when it is, you totally think it's set up to be, like you said, it's going to be, he's going after the guy that killed his pappy or whatever. And it's just, he corrects people throughout the show. It's just, that's not what it is. I'm going to finish his job. He was trying to catch the baddest dude out there, and now I'm just trying to catch the baddest dude out there because he's gone. And those little scenes like that where the boxes of all of stuff, aren't you sentimental? Don't you want all your father's stuff? And he's just like, no, send it to the museum. Yeah. I just got to get to work.
I can use the gun. I can't use the rest of the stuff.
Right.
I got my own hat.
And they even kind of showed the hat. And you're like, oh, I bet he's going to put the hat on. No, the hat goes back in the box. He's got his own hat. He doesn't need his dad's hat. Mm-hmm. And it's little stuff like that is just really, really different. And especially, like you said, for the time, kind of refreshing. And even today, this would totally be a revenge tale. Totally.
Oh, yeah.
You know what I mean? You killed my father, prepare to die. That's what this would be all about, and it's just not. It's a very interesting take, and very conscious one too. It's extremely conscious that they're doing this. And
so Brisco manages to get to the gang through the singer Dixie Cousins, who's played by Kelly Rutherford. And she is very much a Mae West kind of, nothing but double entendre coming out of this woman's mouth. It's all innuendo. And I think it's great fun. It's interesting because I think it's pretty clear that they're trying to set up the professor's daughter, Amanda Wickwire, as the love interest of the series. And the chemistry is just not there with the actress, where immediately the chemistry is there with Dixie Cousins.
Yeah.
And so when you're watching the show, it looks like Dixie Cousins is going to be a femme fatale that comes and goes. And she ends up being in the majority of the episodes going forward.
Yeah, she was good. You're right. They were really, really good whenever on screen together. And as you said, man, they laid the innuendo on thick.
Well, not just that, visually too. The show plays very family friendly, and yet she comes out in full lingerie, and especially the hips, man. That was some 8 o'clock hips.
Yeah, again, but there's a scene who's like, oh, they're planning on robbing a railroad. Really? Where's the railroad at? South, way south. And then her hands like moving down, and you're like, oh, what's going on? This is
past the mountains into the valley.
Yeah.
So let's see. So there's various turns of fortune and some investigating on Brisco's part.
Did we talk about the handle of the gun?
Yeah.
Okay. That he was the one that carved the handle?
Right.
Okay, I spaced out and missed that. Sorry.
Various turns of fortune and investigations occur. For a while there, Brisco pretends to be an outlaw, and that gets him in with Big Smith's gang. He runs afoul of Pete, and
I should say that there was another scene where they do the testing, where he's sitting at the table having a drink with Big Smith, and Big Smith's like, you wouldn't happen to heard of Brisco County Jr., would you? And he's all like, no. Oh, wait, isn't he like a marshal? And he's like, no, that's Brisco County Sr. And then he's talking about, I'm the one who killed him. And he talked about
me and 12 other guys.
Yeah, and how they riddled his body full of da-da-da-da-da. And the whole time you're waiting for...
Well, he's talking about how he's a squaw lover and a card cheat and all kinds of other slurs of the day, supposedly.
Yeah, and Briscoe's just taking his sip of whiskey, like, okay, all right, just so, and and you can tell they're zooming on Big Smith's face as he's saying all these slights towards his pappy, and no, doesn't get a rise out of him. He's good to go.
The gang definitely distrusts Kansas Pete or whatever, Kansas Joe or whatever the hell he's calling himself, but they don't know that there's anything wrong with him, and he does show some aptitude, and he ends up being useful, so they keep him around for a little bit. But he runs afoul of Pistol Pete by touching Pistol's piece, which you cannot do, and so he's going to have a shootout in the street like you see in the movies. Pete, though, has 3 other guys at different angles ready to shoot Brisco so that they make sure he's going to die. Brisco hits the dirt, and all 4 guys end up shooting one another and appear to die. Except one of the guys is Pete, and as I mentioned before, Pete appears throughout the series. So clearly somebody decided that they wanted more Pete before all was said and done. So you can definitely tell they haven't quite figured out the show yet.
Probably a pretty good idea because he does kind of separate himself from the rest of the gang as being most memorable, right?
He stands out far more than Big Smith does.
Yeah.
I like Pete throughout the series, and there are moments in the show, the pilot, where I like Pete, and there are other moments where he is so obnoxious, he's like the worst thing in the show at the same time. So it's a real contrast between do we or do we not want Pete around?
It's a very good question, and you're right. Yeah, sometimes Pete's his persona is so different. You're like, wow, it's good to have him in the show, and like I said, he's memorable in the scenes that he's in. But then you're right, sometimes he's so eccentric and so
obnoxious is the word, especially when he's singing. That
obnoxious,
time.
And you're like,
the bit's going way too long.
Yeah.
So ultimately, Brisco and Lord Bowler are tied up on the railroad tracks with a train coming at them. We haven't talked about Comet yet. You want to get into Comet?
Comet's his horse.
Comet doesn't know that he's a horse. And so he does things that are very unhorse-like, like walking into buildings and knocking on doors.
Now, people who have not seen the show, it sounds super cheeseball. And you may have been with us in this podcast until we just mentioned that his horse doesn't believe that he's a horse and does things that horses don't do. Of course. But...
Well, there's a great bit, too, where Comet starts talking to Socrates.
Right. Well, at least we think he is. And it turns out that it's Lord Bowler.
Right.
Saying, hey, where's... That was
I love that bit. That was great.
That was hilarious. But no, it'll be like when he first meets all the robber barons, and Comet just sort of struts through the hallways and does he knock on the door or whatever, and Brisco opens it up, and he's like, yeah, get back outside. Like, he just does this every now and then.
Super intelligent horse.
Yeah, super intelligent. But his vulnerability is green apples.
Right.
So as long as you can give Comet green apples, he'll do whatever he wants. Lord Bowler placates his appetite for green apples. That's what leads him to Brisco County, which then gets him all
messed up because Big Smith is
blows
also
his
aware of
cover.
the green apple
Yeah,
thing.
it blows his cover, and that's how the two of them get tied up on the tracks.
But Comet is also the one who saves them, so he redeems himself.
Right. So Comet stomps on the ropes to break the rope so he gets up.
Today I met an interesting fellow, a professor by the name of Wickwire. Like me, he seems to have one eye on the future, always looking for the coming thing. He seems to be a bit off his rocker, but I like the guy anyway. He had built this thing in his barn that's difficult to describe. In essence, it's a giant cylinder filled with fuel that, when ignited, will cause enough thrust to lift the apparatus off the ground at a great velocity. Very fancy vehicle. In fact, it came in pretty handy today when I needed to make up some lost ground in a hurry. We laid it out horizontally and set it on a railroad car, lit the fuse, and let her rip. I have to say, it was one of my better schemes. Now, if I only knew how to stop it.
When the show was coming out, it was heavily promoted by Fox. Fox assumed this show was going to be a big hit, and the one image you saw in all the commercials was Brisco goes to the Professor Wickwire, and he knows from having met him throughout the episode that he's been working on a rocket. And he actually talks to them about things he could do to improve the rocket because they make a point of showing Brisco's an intelligent guy. He knows Latin. He knows how rockets work, that kind of thing. So they strap the rocket to one of those railway derricks, whatever you call the things, the pump things where you push yourself along the railway. And so he rockets after the train that they're robbing that's full of gold and also happens to contain the orb. And there's a fight ensues. Big Smith ends up falling off of the rail, off of a...
I guess we never say the government seizes the orb. Did we mention that? Because
we didn't get into that.
It's supposed to be taken to the Smithsonian to be studied.
Yeah.
Because it obviously has some sort of special power.
Right. But
they show that very early on and make you kind of forget about the orb.
Yeah. Yeah, because again, there's a sci-fi element from the very beginning, and then a little tiny bit of it in the middle, and then at the end it pops up a little bit one more time until it pops up in a big way. So Brisco uses the orb to deflect a bullet being shot by Big Smith, then throws the orb at him and knocks him off of a bridge into rapids where he drowns, apparently. The orb is bouncing in the water and disappears, and so this is another loose thread that's going to pick up later in the series. Brisco goes back to town, and he confronts one of the robber barons, because it turns out that he was the one who had tipped Dixie off to the gold bullion carrying train.
Because they mentioned
he wanted
earlier,
to get the orb since the orb was being seized by the government, because while it was his coolies that found the orb, he owns the track, he doesn't own the land, it's government land. And the government feels like they need to have a thing that can give you superhuman powers, and he feels like, no, he ought to have that. So Brisco County confronts the robber baron, one specific robber baron, the one whose coolies had found the orb.
Oh, no, I don't remember now. So they make a point of saying, hey, nobody, that's fine that you know that a train has gold on it. The important thing is you need to know the train schedules. The train schedules are very closely guarded, and that's where Brisco puts two and two
knows
together.
That there's got to be a mole or something.
That someone who knows train schedules must have tipped off Dixie that could tip off Big Smith to then know where to set the booby trap for the train.
I do wonder if there was maybe some stuff that got cut too, because they make a big point of how the rock that was painted at the beginning of the show, you would take somebody with special skill to do that. They managed to track down who that person is, and then he fled town, and then nothing ever comes of that again.
Yeah, you're right.
So I don't know if that's just part of showing the detective skills of Brisco County as a way to show his intelligence. It doesn't actually end up contributing at all to the resolution of the story.
Except other than the coincidence that that's where Dixie happened to be playing that night.
Well, just because they were discussing that revelation. Because Dixie is Big Smith's girlfriend, and that's how she gets dragged into it. But the robber baron is Granville Thorogood, who's played by Stuart Whitman, who's probably best known for the Comancheros. He was in tons of westerns. He was just one of those character actors who was always in the westerns. And so he reveals that the whole thing was so he could get his hands back on the orb, because if the orb gave the coolies these superhuman strength, what will it do for him? And he starts manhandling Brisco County to demonstrate his power.
Because there is a quick scene in the beginning where the dude from the Smithsonian is telling him, I'm taking this back to my lab, and he's telling the guys, load it up. And Thorogood walks over to the tent and closes the sheet. And that's when he goes and he pulls one of the rods out, I imagine.
So presumably, he recognizes its power and then wants
even though
it more.
he turns it over, but he did empower himself before turning it over.
Yeah. And there was also a bit where the government terms the orb as an unearthed foreign object. And one of the government guys is like, that's a mouthful. And then they just write UFO onto the box. So
Awesome. It's hilarious.
What's a UFO? It's clearly a Western, but they want to make sure they tell you right up front, look, don't freak out when we bring sci-fi stuff into this. We've literally got a box that says UFO on it. Be cool about this, okay? And thus you have the rocket, that they're letting you know in the advertising. They're very straightforward. If we have rockets on this show, maybe this isn't a typical Western. Brisco's getting manhandled by the robber baron, but the robber baron then starts suffering the ill effects of his exposure to the orb. His eyes go black, his cheeks go sunken in. It's very, very stage makeup-y. He looks like he was supposed to be like Dr. Jekyll or something.
Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, yeah.
And then he falls onto a table, and through some really cheesy digital effects combined with some practical elements, he turns to dust.
I liked it. I liked the effect.
But it was very pre-CGI. It reminded me a little bit of some of that weird face stuff that they were doing in the black and white video of Michael Jackson. But it looked so squirrely to me, I wasn't that into it.
I don't even know if that was CGI. I don't
think it was CGI.
I still think that was an old practical camera effect where they sort of fade to a mannequin or fade to a...
I don't know what it was, but it just didn't work for me.
I liked it. I thought it was cool.
That's cool. That's different strokes. And so we set up that, John Bly's still out there. Brisco goes to his father's grave to show that, he lives with his father. He's going to catch the men who killed him and just kind of continue his work. And that's pretty much the end of the
Well, they also
episode.
set up that he's got to find out what's going on with the orb.
There's curiosity about what's going on with the orb because the orb appears to be the coming thing.
The coming thing, what he's looking for. That's right.
A few things we didn't touch on. Did you know Julius Carry from anything else?
Who?
This would be Lord Bowler.
No. I only know him from Brisco County.
He's probably best known for The Last Dragon.
Was that Bruce Lee's last movie or whatever? What was The Last Dragon? Or the Bruce Lee...
He was shown up. It was in 1985, so no, it's a popular 80s movie. If Fix-It were here, he'd be crying sacrilege right now.
Sorry.
And he was in tons of stuff. He passed on, unfortunately, 10 years or so ago, about 10 years ago, yeah. But he was a character actor who's in tons of stuff. I mean, when you're that tall, you have that great bass voice, you're going to get a lot of work. There are a ton of other old Western character actors in this show, too. The Virginian himself, James Drury, was in this one. Paul Brenninger from Rawhide and High Plains Drifters in it. Rayford Barnes from The Wild Bunch. Robert Fuller from tons of 70s shows mostly, but he was also in The Return of the Magnificent Seven. And the judge was played by Burt Remsen. And this dude was in tons of stuff, including Dick Tracy and a bunch of other movies. This guy... He was always popping up in flicks in the 70s, especially.
What about Socrates?
Is
he honestly, anybody, or do I just know him?
I think you just know him as Socrates. He's done some other character work, but I can't name anything. He was in The Big Lebowski. He was in The Fisher King. But they're such small parts. Apollo 13, but really small stuff. I always know him as Socrates Poole, even though I've seen him in other stuff. The big one, though, because he was driving you nuts, is you couldn't remember who the hell Professor Albert Wickwire was.
Yeah.
And you still haven't figured it out.
No.
Okay, now... When I was coming on to watching the show, I knew him best from Night Court because he played Harry's eccentric dad on Night Court.
Yeah, maybe that's where I know him.
But, of course, he was already famous before then for playing in The Addams Family. He was Gomez Addams.
Oh, shoot. Oh, darn. Yeah, that's got to be it. Addams Family and Night Court has got to be where I know him from.
Yep. And I love John Astin, so I was so happy to see him. And he's so great. He's basically playing Doc Brown.
Right.
And he's great at it. It's great fun. He plays so well off of Brisco. I still suspect that they didn't intend for him to be a recurring character, but it was clear that should be the case by the time you saw the pilot. So rewatching the pilot today, what did you think of it?
It was slower than I remember.
Lugubrious, yes. It was, yeah.
But like you kind of mentioned, like in the early part of it, they're setting up. It's a pilot.
They're still figuring it out.
Yeah, they're figuring it out. They're setting some stuff up, but there's still enough in it that has really got me like, what the heck happens with this orb, dude?
Right.
Like, the orb is such a great. I don't know. The orb is so fascinating. I love the design of the orb. Mm-hmm. The fact that there's just no, they don't do the whole prelude of like a comet hitting Earth,
right?
And then you talk about like you've got no clue where
how long this has been here, where it came from,
exactly. What are the true extent of its powers? Why did it work for the rail workers? But
they came out fine.
Thurgood.
Yeah.
Lots of intriguing stuff there, and then you.
By the way, a brief true story. again, while researching to do this podcast, I found a person who was apparently a fabricator working on this show, among other shows, who still had an orb. And I actually reached out to that person to contact them because apparently it was available for sale, although no prices were listed. And I was just inquiring because it's a prop from a movie, so that could be pretty darn expensive. But this show was a pretty big failure. I mean, it had a cult following. It did okay on cable, but even though Fox had expectations of the show, those expectations were not met. It was canceled after one season. So it's like, this could be attainable. I could get the orb, the coming thing, but the person never replied to me. Oh. So, but I feel strongly enough about the show and about the orb. I actually did reach out to the person trying to buy one of the orbs.
We should reach out again and ask for an interview for a podcast.
Well, if you didn't reply when I was looking to, give them money, I doubt that they're going to reply, yeah, I'll do a podcast for free.
Hey, man, I'll do it.
Because everybody doesn't have 3 podcasts already.
He's probably got a podcast. We should probably look at it.
He's got the Orb podcast. We're totally already behind starting this one.
I know, we're totally stealing the name. Oh, I got the Orb. It's my podcast.
By the way, if by chance I look it up and it turns out there is already an Orb podcast, we're going to call this thing The Coming Thing.
Gotcha. All right, so to continue on about the show, the other thing that other than just the nostalgia kick of me wanting to watch the show over again because it was a part of my childhood, is man, I miss practical effects.
Yeah.
I mean,
and stunts.
And stunts, right. When he catches up to the train on the jet rail car or whatever, and then he has to lasso it to the train and then has to shimmy up the rope, that's a real stuntman shimmying up a rope between a moving train and a car, stuff like that. And I
don't care how good the CGI gets. I don't care how cool the blue screen is. You can tell the difference.
But the key thing is that this is a network show, and network CGI is way worse. Case in point, have you seen any of the commercials for this new Magnum PI show?
No.
That is horrible. It is so awful.
We are speaking to a Magnum PI fan too, is worth noting.
And there are there's this huge epic chase in it, dude, where he's driving the Ferraris around.
Well, I mean, the show's actually on now. You haven't seen the episode.
No,
right?
No, I'm not going to watch any of it.
No.
But just the CGI in this trailer for this show is so awful. It is like it's an affront to everything. I mean, because in the old days they would have crashed some cars, or at least crashed some miniatures.
Right.
Crashed miniatures looks better than this network television CGI. And you can tell some of the train stunts on this thing were probably miniatures, right? But they do it so quick, and the flashes are so fast, cutting from real train to fake train. You can't really tell, and especially it's not so obvious that you're even thinking about the next. You're not paying attention to the next scene because you're thinking about how bad the prior scene was. It's not doing that.
Now, this is sort of leading into the whole rocket car sequence, which was really one of the most incredible experiences in my entire movie career, because we're going to go in here and we've seen the rocket, and now Brisco has this sort of idea, sort of combining his futurism with sort of Western tradition. Take the rocket, mount it sideways on a sidecar, and use it to chase down the train. Now, in no one's right mind would you ever actually build this thing so that it could actually work. You would come up with some sort of movie trickery.
Oh, you'd
way.
Fake it. You'd get it out of frame and then show some other fakery.
Yeah,
you tow it.
No, but Cam Cooney, I think, was that his name?
I think it was.
The effects guy. He actually built this thing. This thing actually worked.
And had an engine. It had a combustible engine in it, which had
a gas, like a
totally. My right foot was on a throttle so that I could control the speed of it. And the problem I had is that the front of the hat kept going up like Gomer Pyle, because I actually got going fairly fast. And there was one sequence where it just cracked me up because. Yeah, I love how
was
that
pulled
comes
on a
out.
Piece of filament.
Yeah.
But
it's
the thing. But Bruce was actually riding by in that thing, and I remember at camp saying, "Now, Bruce, you got this little button here, and now this button puts the flame out now." But you got to be careful because the flame will go like 20 or 30 feet. So just make sure no one's standing behind the rocket car when you light this thing off.
Yeah, I'm like, thanks, Cam. Thanks a lot. But there was one sequence where Jack Green, the DP, was laughing afterward because he goes, when we were shooting this and you had to try and come up from behind on the rocket and catch the train, I actually had to come from behind, from around a corner in the same shot and try and catch up to the train. And if I came too fast, I would actually ram the back of the train. So I had to... And meanwhile, I'm getting my rope out because I have to lasso the thing. So I have to at least start doing that on camera for real to get the stunt guy into it. You have to get that far. And I thought, this is the most ridiculous job anyone could ever have. What did you do today, Daddy? Oh, I chased a a train on the back of a rocket, and then I lassoed it and crawled across and got on top of it. So this was an actor's fantasy in many. Of course, it's a difficult show. It was hard on everybody, but where else would you do this sort of goofy stuff?
And it was great watching these stuntmen actually do these transfers. That's what they're called.
Yeah.
They're called a transfer.
And, we had one horse, this horse Boss, that was just for that stuff. And the Wranglers had a thing called a step. One of the stirrups that was the closest to the train, you'd put just a step so your foot could not get stuck in a stirrup, because if you jumped off and got caught, you could get dragged by that horse. So you just jumped off a metal L-shaped thing and right on, and I'm still like, forget it, man. I'm not going near that.
But they were. I mean, the train was going, 15 or 20 miles an hour, and they rode right up to the side of it and jumped on.
Yeah, now this is where the stunt coordinator kept yelling at me the whole time, because I kept telling him, look, how hard could it be? I can just get my legs over and I'll just go from the train to that. They'll just shoot it. This is Clint Lilly, thankfully, doing this for me. And I just did a few feet at the end, but he was starting to get mad because he saw it in my eyes. He thought that I wanted to do it, and he went, you better not do this, because if you fall, that rocket's going to run over you. And I went, all right. So it's very tempting. You get in the moment, you go, well, I've done 2/3 of this. Let me go the rest of the way. And it was neat, the interior of the train, that they actually had a real interior that you could shoot in. And who knows if these things are even around anymore.
I know. It was really great. It was such a touchstone to sort of the whole history. That was actually, I think, maybe the only process shot we did was this trestle sequence here in the whole show.
Right. Now, this is miniatures again here, right?
Miniature. That's a miniature, and that's a green screen shot out the door. But this is, you have to realize, was way before those things were done. And so now that fall was a miniature. That's a miniature stream. You can see the water looks slightly like an old King Kong movie, an old Godzilla movie.
But it accomplished the effect. You saw what happened, and
exactly.
At the time, there was still high budget. Even to have a miniature was just high budget.
Yeah,
this was actually fun because, again, now you're on a real train, going down the tracks, running up along the top on the wood, and it's where every so often your job feels like it's real. You don't have to fake anything. You're just doing it.
Now, of course, this is cut in with miniatures here.
I did not actually crash this train.
So this is all a miniature, a little tableau here, which I thought, again, done pretty well going into the big finale here.
Well, it's funny because I recently watched Star Trek Discovery, which is being produced for CBS All Access. And so I'm watching it, and I'm expecting, I'm not expecting like great special effects or anything, and it looks really good. It looks really, really nice. I'm like, holy crud, how are they managing to get these special effects? And I look it up, it's like, because they're spending $8 million an episode on Star Trek Discovery. Back in the PA, I ain't getting no $8 million an episode, so I'm sure that plays a big part in that.
So that was one thing that was just really, really refreshing, is that the stunts, the practical effects were all really good.
Some of the stunt work is pretty bad too.
But it's also
the part
it's
where
also a Western,
right?
So there is the spaghetti cheese ball side to it too, and it kind of works.
That is
with the
charming
show
as well. Yeah,
they're not. It's not. That's right. There's a charming factor to it. They're not. It's not like Magnum PI where they're like, this is a real, it's an action show. So you're supposed to kind of take everything at face value. We're supposed to take this seriously, and your side is splitting. You're laughing so hard. In this case, I think it works with the tone of the show.
Right. I'd agree with that. But I could have stood without the Scarred Foot Clan guy's foot lingering in front of the camera for 10 seconds. That was not a good shot. I did have some problems with the direction on this episode too. I do think that the show, as it progresses, is a little tighter, a little. I think it's a little better shot. This one, too many of the shots linger for just too long, and so part of that's the editing. But I do think the direction, the cinematography can a little bit better too. You can tell in parts that they spent money on it. You can tell the network had some faith in the show and they put some money into it. And there are other parts where it's like, well, that looks pretty cheap, or that's just not very well done. So a bit of both.
But other than that, I liked it.
I still enjoyed it. I still enjoyed the pilot. I watched it back in '93 when it first aired. I don't think I ever got to, because I was videotaping the show. I didn't start when the series was first getting started. I don't think I taped it from the very beginning. I think I was watching it. I enjoyed it. It's like, I want to have these for posterity. So I taped most of the series on VHS tapes. I believe I still have those VHS tapes up in the attic somewhere.
I've got some episodes on VHS somewhere too. Yeah.
But I don't think I ever got this pilot movie because I don't remember ever seeing it again after the initial run.
With commercials, that's a full 2 hours.
Yeah.
I mean, it's...
I was taping on extended play, so that wouldn't have made too much of a difference. But I do see what you mean, though. They'd have broken it up into 2 episodes, and yeah. And if it had been a bigger hit too, I know that the show reran. I don't know if the entire show reran on the network, and I never watched it on cable. You mentioned USA Network,
I could have sworn I watched it on USA.
I believe it ran in reruns on USA years later.
So I have never watched this show sequentially. I'm sure there are episodes I've missed. I am 100% sure I have forgotten a lot of this. So I'm very interested to go through this journey with you, sir.
Yeah, but I definitely enjoyed the movie. It definitely propelled me to go ahead and keep watching the show, but I didn't immediately start taping it either from the pilot or afterwards. It probably took a few episodes to get in there. The relationships do start to change. The show, I think, does get better as it progresses, but it's still very cute now. It's entertaining. If for no other reason than out of love for Bruce Campbell, it'd be easy to keep watching the show, but there's more to it than that.
He's just so electric whenever he's on screen. There's just something about Bruce Campbell.
Exactly.
I think that's
he's
why...
so charismatic. He's damned handsome back then too. Especially
Absolutely.
he was in great shape. He's a handsome guy.
Even with the fake mustache.
Maybe not with the fake mustache. That's a really bad mustache.
Maybe even with the fake mustache. But yeah, dude. I mean, he good looking dude, man. Bruce Campbell, good looking dude. Great personality, just charisma and machismo dripping off the guy in every freaking scene. You believe every woman in the show that kind of falls for him. You totally get it.
Right.
I mean, he's great. Everything. If you mention that Bruce Campbell is in something, I will definitely consider watching it. Whereas a lot of people are like, we'll have to see who's directing it, who's the supporting cast. Bruce Campbell's in it. There's a good chance I'm getting me some Ash or Brisco out of it. So let's go.
Yeah. Basically, he's a guy who you want to see in things, so you have to basically dissuade me. Oh, it's a Bruce Campbell thing. Well, why shouldn't I watch that? And then they'll tell you some reasons, and there's been a number of things I haven't watched with Bruce Campbell because of that. But I'm always willing to at least give something a shot if he's in it. And I do think, too, this show, as much as I like the show, I think its lack of success probably hurt his career. Because I really do think that, like us, there are a lot of people who are probably looking at this guy and seeing those qualities and like, this guy is going to be a leading man. We're going to put money into this show. And then when it didn't do anything, he never really got this chance again. I mean, the only thing that he got as a lead actor was like Jack of all trades. And that was after he'd already been doing Xena and Hercules for a while. So I do think this show actually ended up hurting his career, but you could absolutely see why people would have thought he was going to be a big thing at that time.
Yeah, it's. I'd love to see if there's some sort of narration of his career to figure out why he just never really exploded. I'm sure he's not hurting, right? But
you gotta get up on that Audible and listen to his book on tape or something. What do they call book on tapes these days? Audio presentation, audiobook. There you go.
Yeah, I mean,
I'm an old. You have to work that out for me.
I just don't.
I really do. I need to go ahead and get audio book because I want to hear him read his own book. And he totally does.
You right now, 90-day trial.
Yeah,
just
I need to
cancel
do that
after the 90 days is up. You can buy his book for free and you keep it forever.
Yeah, I need to do that for no other reason than his research for the show. I don't know how much he talks about Brisco County in his books, but yeah, you're right. Just as far as the overall career, it'd be interesting to see.
Well, I mean, it's is he an ass? Is it himself that is killing him?
I really don't think that's it. I really don't think that because people love him, and I don't think that he would have so much love if there was anything wrong with him. I think that it's just he kept being in stuff that wasn't all that successful.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Did he just pick the wrong
movies
roles?
Did
he get typecast? I don't know.
He's a cult favorite because the Evil Dead movies were super gory and they did not get wide releases and they were not going to get large audiences because people just were not prepared for that level of gore back in the day. Army of Darkness was his first shot at the brass ring because they thought it was going to be a big crossover hit, and it was a modest success but nothing too big. They spent a bunch of money on Brisco County Jr. and then that was not a big success. and you only get so many shots.
But also,
I think he got the shots because he's a good guy, but you have to do something with those shots. And but part of it is the material. He's a kind of a quirky guy, and he does quirky material, and that doesn't always go over. Now, he might have done it much better today, but in that time, I don't think people were ready for any of the things he was in.
But he seems like a guy that like you couldn't have him co-star, right?
But he does.
Well, I know, but
I mean, I
feel like if I was the star of a movie and you're going to cast Bruce Campbell, deep down, don't you think everybody's you're afraid he's going to steal your scenes?
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
I can see that.
There's almost something like that too, where it's like, so he can't quite make it as the leading guy, but you never want to have him be second piece
because he detracts from you. Yeah,
yeah. So he kind of maybe is in this weird.
Well, I mean, because if you think about it, the stuff he did in the latter 90s was mostly Ted Raimi Productions, Renaissance Pictures stuff. And so Kevin Sorbo probably doesn't get to pick who his co-star is on a given episode. You know, Lucy Lawless doesn't get to. And I think Lucy Lawless must like him because she's popped up in a bunch of his stuff since then, including Ash vs. Evil Dead. Jack of All Trades, which, again, was another shot at him in the leading role, co-starring with another actor. But that didn't go over. That didn't even get like a full season. I think that only lasted like 8 episodes, 12 episodes, something like that. So it's not for lack of a want in the audience. There just isn't a mass audience that was showing up for Bruce Campbell, with the possible exception of Burn Notice, where he was essentially a sidekick or a supporting role. But USA Network ended up being his home because Burn Notice ran forever, it seemed like.
I just feel like he needs to be a member of Stallone's crew in the next Guardians movie or something. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like he could fit into that kind of quirky, kooky space cowboy. Although, you know, we lost James Gunn now, so maybe he wouldn't fit in that movie. But, you know, I feel like there's something for him somewhere that I would like to get me a little more Bruce Campbell, because Ash vs. Evil Dead is
which was great.
It's stuck on Stars though.
It's over. They canceled it. Well, and it's funny too because he was talking about that. He said he's officially retired from playing Ash Williams. He's pushing 60.
Well, we'll see about that.
He's pushing 60. He's too old for that. He's tired of having Carol syrup up his nose. He just can't do that anymore. I totally understand that being the case, but he's actually expressed interest in bringing back Brisco County.
Hopefully not Ash, because he's kind of a moron. I'll take Brisco, The Adventures of Brisco County Jr. He was the closest I've ever played to actually being like a real hero, not that flawed. He was smart. He was capable. So that would be me on my absolutely best day. Ash would be me on my worst day.
I think it's a situation sort of like with Harrison Ford, where he's known for Ash Williams. I'm sure he's got love for Ash Williams. I know he's got love for Ash Williams, but I think that maybe Brisco County has a special place in his heart more so than Ash, because with Ash, I don't know if he necessarily likes playing such a goofus. I mean, especially in Ash vs. Evil Dead, he's a charming idiot, racist, misogynist, womanizer. It's like, so there's a lot there that's probably fun to play, but he might want to be able to move past playing somebody who's kind of scummy. Or Brisco is a really good guy, a true heroic character, an intelligent person, an optimistic person, a person who does not take life, willy-nilly. He kills when he has to, but it's not.
Well, like
he's not that. That's not who he is.
He's a dreamer too,
right?
And he's looking, like you said, he's looking for the next big thing. I mean,
and again, that's a part you can play as an older man much easier than Ash, because the physical comedy is such a big part of playing Ash that you're not Ash unless he's getting something smashed over his head or something. That's just hard on a body. I mean, Bruce Campbell basically had 2 careers. He was an actor and he was a stuntman, even though he wasn't paid to be a stuntman, but he did so much of his own stunt work for so long. And I'm sure he's got the aches every morning because of it. So yeah, play Brisco County. Be like a mentor to a next generation adventurer. Something like that.
Well,
would be good for him.
Or you wear a big trench coat and get into gun battles and ride a horse occasionally. I mean, I don't know if he necessarily. And you have the stuntman get thrown out of the second floor of a saloon, and you know what I mean. But yeah, I mean, I think that'd be awesome. I still. Just Westerns are weird, man.
Yeah. Well, see, and I think that was a big part of the problem, too, is that we talk about how we're comic book guys. And so for years, they made these comic book TV shows and movies that were cheeseball because Hollywood always thought that they had to take comics and adapt them to make them more like TV shows, more like movies. And usually they'd foreground the really dumb stuff, and then they'd background the more sophisticated stuff. Like they fixated on the crappier, cheesier aspects of comic books, and they failed to see the better stuff, the quality stuff, the stuff that makes us love the comics. And then Marvel Studios comes along, and they get everything we love about the comics and do the adaptations where it's necessary, but they keep that core that we love so much, right? So that's an instance where you had money men who didn't understand the material, and the audience is there and keeps showing up for the material that they're not producing. And then finally, the people who are fans of the material are the executives, are the directors, are the writers, and you get what the potential is fulfilled, right? Well, I think that Brisco County was sort of the opposite, where for decades, film and television was dominated by Westerns. And there was just this great love for it. And you saw by the 60s, the zeitgeist was moving away from that. But it got some extended life through anti-heroes, through dark revisionist takes on the Western by guys like Clint Eastwood. And they managed to carry that into the 80s. By the 80s, the Western really was pretty much dead, with exceptions, but they kept being these revivals. Like everybody thought after Silverado, there was going to be a revival. Earlier in the 90s, you had Unforgiven, and everybody thought that was the start of a revival. Young Guns was big. And you can actually see Young Guns, moving into this, you can see where they might have thought, this is going to be a thing. And there was a period in the early 90s where they did a bunch of TV Westerns. Tombstone. But think about it, though. Unforgiven and Tombstone, those are the Westerns that came out in the 90s, and then name a third one.
Right.
And so I think what happened is you had a bunch of TV executives that grew up on Westerns. They loved things like Wild Wild West. And so they greenlit a Wild Wild West movie, and that was a huge bomb.
Or Maverick.
Yeah.
Right?
And so this looked like we're going to basically do a revival of Wild Wild West with a twist. And they thought this was going to be a huge hit, and it comes out and it's El Floppo. This thing just does not do well at all in the ratings. And I think that was a situation where the executives were making the show that they were fans of, the stuff that they grew up on, the stuff that they understood, but the audience was no longer there. They may have made the best possible sci-fi Western you could make, but if there was nobody there to watch it, and you knew that people were going to show up on Fridays because the following hour, X-Files was coming on. And that show built up over several seasons. It started out as just like a minor thing, but it was enough of a cult hit where it got season after season, ended up running 8 seasons. If I recall correctly, it was 8 seasons that the thing ran. So the audience was there for X-Files, and they just weren't there for Brisco County, because I think that the zeitgeist was moving away from this sort of thing, even though I thought they did a great job with what they were trying to do.
Well, I mean, in a lot of ways, the Western is like the station wagon. Your grandparents or your parents own the station wagon. The station wagon is practical. It's tried and true. It runs. It fits the whole family. It's got a huge, trunk area where you can fit tons of stuff. You can
sleep back there.
Absolutely.
I saw Star Wars in the back of one of those.
The problem is everyone grew up in a station wagon, and nobody wanted to own what your grandparents drove. Mm-hmm. So the station wagons died in America. We don't want... You say the word station wagon, you show a picture of a car that kind of looks like a station wagon, and people go, oh, it looks like my grandmother's car, right? And I think that's what...
Well, and everybody saw Vacation back in the 80s, and everybody saw all these movies that made fun of station wagons back in the 80s.
The doofus dad driving this big, dumb, wood-paneled station wagon around.
You couldn't shake it. And the same thing is true of the Western.
Yeah.
That's the thing your dad watched. It's not what you watch.
It doesn't matter how good or practical or how much it makes sense, you will instantly hate it because that's what your dad drove or your grandfather drove.
And you'll have somebody jump into a PT Cruiser, which is a absolutely garbage vehicle, but it doesn't have the negative association. Buy a station wagon, dude. Don't want me a PT Cruiser. Your ride sucks, dude. It's not a station wagon.
It's why
I'm the cool dad.
In Europe, they're called estates. Everybody, they love estates in Europe. We don't get any of them here in the United States because we don't buy station wagons. We'll buy an SUV, which is just a lifted station wagon. But we don't like the shape. It triggers our brains. We get triggered when we see something that looks like a station wagon.
Well, it is kind of squished like a sandwich. Station wagons do look like a sandwich. You don't look like a ride. It looks like something you would eat.
No, I mean, it looks like something you would eat.
It looks like wood paneling on the road.
Okay, no. Modern station wagons look phenomenal. You can get shooting brakes.
I can't speak for them because I never see the things.
Look, inherently, it's another reason that killed the hatchback, basically. Nobody wants a hatchback because they think of station wagons.
Too.
Hatchbacks are the most practical versions of cars. The liftgate opens. You just set stuff down in it. You get a huge orifice to put stuff into. It's not a trunk that opens up. And these trunks are huge and they're deep, but you only got a tiny little door that opens up for you to actually put stuff in. You're trying to angle it, or you know what I mean? You can't do it. With hatchbacks, you fold the seats down. You fold the seats down. You can slide stuff in. They're by far more practical, but because they look like station wagons, people don't buy hatchbacks. here in the United States. The rest of the world, everybody loves them. And it's because they're practical and they make sense. But again, it's like, it's the Western. For some reason, us Americans, because our grandfathers and our fathers drove them, or our crazy old aunts or our grandmothers, we don't want it. And I think I think unfortunately that's what this show suffered from too. People just were out on the Western, and all you had to show was a dude with a slicker and a hat on a horse, and they were checking out, and they didn't want any part of it because it had to be lame. Whether it was or not, it didn't matter. It's a shame, just like the station wagon, bro.
This pilot, this was filmed by Jack Green, who shot Unforgiven.
Right.
You know, Mike Hancock was my makeup guy. The stunt guys who worked on this had done a lot of Westerns before. This was a first-class pilot shot by Brian Spicer, who I think at the time was sort of a young whiz-bang.
Yeah,
he was a shooter,
visual-oriented director, and you can look from some of this camera work of following Boots up onto the top of the train and all this. I mean, he had a really very, very cool visual style.
Yep, but this really was this was a movie on television.
It was
in the truest sense.
Well, I think actually what happened was the head of Warner Brothers Television at the time, and was really a champion of the project, had basically wanted to see whether he could actually get the pilot released as a theatrical film overseas.
Everything about it didn't seem like a television pilot. It seemed like you were making a movie.
And we approached it that way, and ultimately I remember we actually screened it for the chairman of Warner Brothers Pictures at the time, and he really liked it. But ultimately the problem with releasing it as a theatrical movie is it didn't have an ending. I mean, it had sort of a pseudo ending, but it didn't.
Right, it was
really
designed for television.
Now, stay tuned for scenes from next week's Brisco County Jr.
Xenozoic Xenophiles.
A fan podcast devoted to the comic series Xenozoic Tales.
It's a post-apocalyptic adventure series filled with Cadillacs and dinosaurs.
I'm Ruth.
And I'm Darren.
We hope you'll join us as we discuss the stories, characters, and art in this excellent comic series from creator, writer, and artist Mark Schultz.
Xenozoic Xenophiles is available at podbean.com and on iTunes and Stitcher.
And find us at xenozoicxenophiles.com.
In 2018.
Oh, we believe the secret agents had all that stuff, man.
Your mission, should you choose to accept it.
My son wants to bond over any kind of spy. Secret agent man, Wild Wild West. My spy, man from U.N.C.L.E. The Avenger, James Bond. Our man, Flint.
Bonding Agents, the father and son spy-fi podcast. Your assets.
Old dude.
Diablo Frank.
And the program's about spies and science fiction.
Available to Shout Engine and the Internet Archive, to iTunes, and several podcatchers.
It's not really something I think that most Americans could understand.
Bonding Agents is a Rogue Spine podcast.
The Film and Water Podcast, a weekly show about movies old and new, hosted by obsessive movie nerd Rob Kelly and a rotating series of special guests. From sci-fi to horror, dramas to family films, comedies to adventure epics, we watch it all. The Film and Water Podcast is part of the Fire and Water family of podcasts, available weekly at fireandwaterpodcast.blogspot.com and on iTunes and Stitcher.
Next week on the adventures of Brisco County Jr.
The power of the orb is wonderful, but in the wrong hands, there's incomprehensible danger.
What's in the crates, old man?
You take the one on the left. I'll take the one on the right.
Brisco's not dead. You go back and take care of him.
Where is he?
Even if I knew where that orb was, I'd never tell you, Bly.
Wrong answer.
The Adventures of Brisco County Jr. An all-new episode next Friday at 8, 7 Central.